going to reach millions of people, Chad. So, well, thank you all for coming. So, it's Roger, and I'm sorry, Alicia and Chloe. So, are you on staff for the church here as well?
I'm actually on staff at Williston.
Oh, you are? Okay.
Like, up in the other corner, I guess.
Oh, yeah. Good deal. You guys got, did you get as much snow as Minot last go around, or was it?
We didn't get as much as them, but we did get several feet.
Okay.
Now the problem we're having is flooding.
Yeah, that's what I was going to guess, and I'm surprised it's not more wet here.
Yeah.
Because you guys got a couple of feet here, I think, a few weeks back, didn't you?
Yeah, just before Easter, but then that second storm that came through, we didn't get much here, and they got it on the west side and the east side.
Gotcha.
The second storm, we didn't get much.
Gotcha. Yeah, I know there was obviously some concerns with the ranchers with it being calving season.
Oh, yeah,
There was,
very
I gotta
devastating.
imagine there was some big losses there.
Yeah.
Yikes. Yikes. So, well, my name's Corey Knott. This is my colleague
Chad Rickman.
and I've been in the insurance industry altogether about, I lose track, 17 years or something like that. Been with Church Mutual, I'm in my 10th year now with Church Mutual, so settled in pretty good with this market, and it's been a good transition. But Chad is, and I'm from Minnesota, by the way. I live in a small town about an hour straight west of Minneapolis, and Chad and I we both cover the North Dakota area. His focus is kind of more the Highway 2 corridor north, so Williston area, and then I kind of handle Highway 2 and south. And so I'll let Chad tell a little bit about himself.
So I've been in insurance for about 20 years, and with Church Mutual I'm coming up on 5. I live actually in Wisconsin, right on Lake Superior, so quite a bit different geography compared to here. But yeah, when did we start? I started working in North Dakota.
We're about 2020.
Yeah,
Right,
January 2020. So it's a long drive, so I don't make it as often as I would like to, but to get to you, I've written a couple of accounts in Williston since I've started here, and it's a 12-hour drive from my home to get there, so lots of windshield time.
Yeah.
Good news is you can make good time in North Dakota. You can get somewhere in a hurry if you need to.
My son's a highway patrolman, so.
Okay, I didn't know that.
That's a lot.
I was kidding.
Don't show them the video.
No, well, I mean, your speed limits are so much higher here in general, so you get from Minnesota to here, it's like, you don't need to speed because you already feel like you are, so it's neat. But, so yeah, our plan today was just to have just kind of a chat and some question and answers, and if we don't go the whole 50 minutes, that's fine by us. So, but I think one of the things Chad and I were talking about that we wanted to touch on is probably the most common issue that we're coming across as we're quoting new churches right now, and that is the issue of building valuations. With what construction costs have done over the last couple of years, with what inflation's doing right now, and the supply chain crunch, it's this perfect storm of costs that are just skyrocketing. And so we're running across a lot of churches that are severely underinsured on their buildings right now. No, I'm not concerned about Evangel because you're currently with us, and we're gonna, on an annual basis, recalculate your cost estimates. But industry-wide, or at least in our market, there's a lot of companies that don't really do a very good job of actually surveying the properties that they're insuring. There's not a lot of them that will actually go out to a location, measure the building, get photos, gather the information they need to actually do an accurate cost estimate. And so,
What a lot of people don't understand with churches is if you have stained glass, if you have pipe organ, commercial kitchen, all of that stuff gets added to the building valuations. And a lot of agents would just take the square footage and say, okay, it's X cost per square foot, but not realizing that stained glass, depending as to the quality of the stained glass. If it's Tiffany stained glass, obviously you're talking $10,000 per linear foot. It's extremely expensive, and it adds to the building valuation. Last January or February, I quoted a church, and it was a $2.3 million building. I just updated it this last March, and it had jumped $600,000 in value, just based on the rising cost of the inflation. So there's significant percentages in increases going up on building values. So it's something that within your churches, you want to make sure that you're paying attention to it, because if this inflation keeps going and you haven't looked at it in 2 or 3 years, and all of a sudden 2 or 3 years, you're now 20% underinsured, 30% underinsured, you run into what's called the co-insurance penalties, which you don't want to get hit with.
Right, yeah. We got a newcomer. I'm Corey.
Hi.
I'm Chad.
You are?
Michelle.
Michelle, you missed the introductions part. We had everybody come up in front of the camera and say a little bit about themselves.
Right. Don't believe it.
Where are you from, Michelle?
Beulah, North Dakota.
Oh, Beulah, okay,
Mhm.
yeah. I can picture your church. You go to the I assume you go to the Assembly of God church there, right?
Yes.
Steel building,
Green
blue
light.
roof? Maybe not blue roof, is it got a steel roof on it?
No.
Okay, I might be picturing the wrong church. I know I've quoted you before though.
Yeah.
So anyhow, but yeah, the building valuation is very important, and what that co-insurance penalty clause is pretty much every insurance policy will have that built in. And usually it's 80, 90, or 100%. Most of the time it's an 80% clause that basically says that you need to insure your buildings to at least 80% of their actual replacement cost, or you can be assessed penalties in the event of a claim. And so as an example, let's say you had a $1 million building. The co-insurance clause says that you need to insure it for at least $800,000 to be meeting that 80% threshold. Well, there's a formula that the industry uses to calculate these penalties, and if I had a whiteboard, I would draw it out for you. But basically it says they take the amount of insurance that you did have, and they divide it by the amount of insurance that you should have had, and then that gives you a percentage. And then they multiply that percentage against the actual amount of the loss, and that gives you how much is paid out on that claim. So don't think I'm any kind of a math wizard, because I figured this out earlier on paper, but let's say you had a $1 million building, and it should have been insured at $800,000, but it was only insured for $600,000. Well, that means you were at, the percentage you get there is 75%. You were insured at 75% of what you should have been. So if you had a $100,000 claim, they're only going to pay out $75,000 minus whatever your deductible is. So if you had a $5,000 deductible, now you're out that much money too. And so it can be financially crippling for an organization if there's a significant loss. And especially today, I personally deal with a lot of rural churches that are smaller congregations, maybe even dwindling congregations, that are kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place, where they need to conserve as much money as they can in their budget, and they're not small enough where they would just disband the church if the building burned down. They would want to rebuild. But I see a lot of them that are significantly underinsured and would face a co-insurance penalty even in the event of a partial loss. So Chad's got a pretty drastic example from a year or two ago here on a camp that he worked with, so I'll let you share that story, Chad.
So on the camp that I was working on, our replacement cost estimates on literally every building were almost double than what they had with their current carrier. And so the price that I ended up coming back with was almost double what they were currently paying. Time goes on, and they had a claim on, they had a total fire on the dining hall. So they had the dining hall insured for, I want to say it was like $600,000, maybe $7, and we said that it should have been insured for like $1.9 million. they had to fight it for a year to get any type of claim payout that they thought, and, but they did not get what they thought that they were gonna be getting because of the co-insurance penalty. So now they were wishing that they would have come over to us, but, you know, again, it's the same thing. At the time, camps, you know, with the budgetary issues and everything that, especially coming off of the COVID year where everything was shut down. This was in Minnesota, so all camps were completely shut down for a while. You know, it was all about trying to save money at the time, but they ended up getting hurt big time because they weren't insured properly.
And ultimately, the responsibility of figuring out what those values should be is on the agent. So I don't know if they did or not, but my guess is that agent probably had an errors and omissions claim on their errors and omissions insurance. So our process is, you know, I say unashamedly that Church Mutual is really the best in the industry at doing accurate cost estimates because of the steps that we go through to make sure we do that. So when I come out to a building, or Chad comes out to a building or a camp for that matter, one of the first things that we do is we used to go around and hand laser measure our buildings, or way back in the day, you know, reps would have a measuring wheel that go around the perimeter. I'm really glad we don't have to do that anymore, especially in North Dakota in the wintertime. We actually use a satellite imager now. It's a program called Pictometry. And so our risk control department uses that program to grab overviews of the buildings that we're insuring, and they actually measure them using that satellite imagery. And it's scary accurate. It's within like a 2% margin of error of hand lasering that building. So we've got a dedicated risk control department, and all these folks do as cost estimators all day long is generate these diagrams as they communicate with us about, you know, what sections a building has. You know, if a church has let's say we've got a standard church with a fellowship hall, right? Your standard let's say your standard North Dakota Lutheran church has got a church and a fellowship hall in the basement, or maybe a fellowship hall on the side. Well, we'll section the church off into one area on that diagram, and then section the fellowship hall off because they've got two different construction qualities, right? Sanctuary may have stained glass, may have a pipe organ, it's got higher ceilings, may have glue lamb beams, all things that factor into a higher average cost per square foot. And over here in the fellowship hall, it's usually more standard type construction. So we go to great lengths to make sure that we're really putting in accurate information into our cost estimating software so that we get accurate results back out. So what we do when we go out, we'll make sure our diagram is accurate. We will gather photos, we'll figure out what's on the floors, the walls, the ceilings, what type of construction is it? Is it frame? Is it joisted masonry? Is it whatever ISO type construction it is? We give it all risk control, and they spit out a cost estimate for us, and that's what we use to base our values off of. So from an insurance standpoint, we've got to be concerned about if this building were to be completely, now that won't happen with a building like this, would it ever be completely destroyed? Highly unlikely. But let's say a building was, we need to be concerned about what would it cost to rebuild it. So that's
rebuild it as is, no better, no worse.
right, rebuild it as is. Now that doesn't mean you'd have to rebuild the exact same structure. You have flexibility in that, but as far as establishing value, that's what we've got to do. So that is the biggest number one conversation that I had in having with churches nowadays because of what costs have done, and because a lot of independent agents that maybe don't have access to the systems that we do, they just don't have good methods for valuing their buildings, so they're using maybe an average cost per square foot, which has become rapidly outdated. So as far as the number one issue that I've been running into, that's certainly been it. And our plan for today was, again, just to kind of do a question and answer session, I guess. If there's things you guys are curious about when it comes to insurance, concerns that you might have, we'll do our best to get those questions answered for you. And if we don't have a good answer, we'll do some digging and figure it out. So is there anything we can think of?
I'll move off the building for a little bit. What about the other liability issues that you're facing? HR issues, people being fired, sexual assault of children and youth by staff and or volunteers, personal injury on the grounds, or maybe I'm not even hitting, what are the things that we need to be concerned about?
All of those.
Yep. I think one thing I'll touch on here real quick, and maybe as I talk, Chad, you'll think of something to dovetail off of. When you mentioned the employment-related stuff, employment practices liability is something that I'm seeing continue to become more and more important, even with churches. What employment practices liability does is it protects an organization from accusations of things like wrongful termination, discrimination in hiring or firing, and also sexual harassment, which is categorized differently than sexual misconduct. Sexual harassment would be employee to employee. And I've seen quite a lot more claims in that area against our churches and private schools than I ever thought I would when I started with Church Mutual. But that's the society that we live in. You know, I don't know when it happened. It was years ago, but the stigma of suing the church has long since worn off. You know, that's gone, if there ever was one. So employment practices liability is very important, and our policies have something called management protection liability, which would include coverage for employment practices. And there's another component to that specific coverage, which is for the board, the officers, the elders, whoever the fiduciary decision makers are in the church. It's called directors, officers, and trustees liability. And that's like errors and omissions insurance for the board of directors. So I will say this, I personally don't recall seeing one directors and officers claim against any of my churches in my 10 years with Church Mutual. In Minnesota, North Dakota, and South Dakota, the state statutes governing nonprofits have some very strong protections in place for nonprofit boards of directors. I don't remember exactly how North Dakota's reads. It's actually more, what's the word I'm looking for? More favorable even than what Minnesota says. But what Minnesota says is directors and officers of nonprofits are not civilly liable for damages stemming from acts of errors or omissions. So the state statutes basically say that you're not civilly liable for accidents or errors or omissions in your decision making. But that doesn't stop someone from bringing a lawsuit, and that doesn't prevent legal costs from being incurred. So at minimum, that directors and officers coverage is very important just to have legal defense costs in place. But from a litigation standpoint, certainly the employment practices liability is very, very important. In fact, I've had two that have popped up on my, we get claims notifications on a monthly basis. I've had two of those pop up in the last couple of months. So,
Also on the liability side, something that we are seeing industry-wide is cyber liability. Churches, both large and small, are getting attacked. Networks are getting shut down and basically being held for ransom. And so it's really important to actually, if you have any type of online presence, that you're properly going through and making sure that you have things backed with firewalls, that you have multi-factor authentication protocols to get in, again, if you're keeping stuff online. So we work with a company, Church Mutual has a partnership with a company called Beasley. They're one of the top cyber liability insurers in the world. In fact, if everybody remembers the Target, when Target was attacked and all their information was stolen, Beasley was the insurer for them. So that's another key liability one that we are seeing more and more claims on that than anything.
yeah.
And obviously the sexual misconduct coverage, particularly when it comes to kids, making sure that you have the proper policies and procedures in place, making sure that nobody is, that you don't have one-on-one situations. You want to make sure that there's always at least two people that are not related to each other. the situation was compared to them siding with their family member. So you want to make sure that you don't have two related people in one room, just for that reason. I don't know, is there anything else?
Yeah, actually, I want to go back to the cyber liability side of things. Our cyber liability coverage protects you in two primary areas. So we'll see a lot of companies that will put cyber liability coverage in the policy, but what it covers is there's a lot of gray areas in there. As an example, a lot of cyber liability policies will not cover for paper records, whereas ours does. So it should really be called privacy liability when it comes down to it. So it protects you against data breach. So when someone's personally identifiable information is accessed, whether it be through a church computer system or whether it be someone breaking into the building and files are missing, that could be a data breach. Responding to that breach is what's most important, because states can levy fines against organizations for not properly notifying people if their information has been exposed. So raise your hand if you've ever gotten a letter in the mail from your bank or credit card company that says, hey, there was a data breach, FYI, your information may have been exposed. Those letters need to be drafted and sent out. Well, Beasley would come alongside of you and walk you through responding to that claim appropriately. The most common one that I'm seeing is the cyber extortion. Phishing emails abound nowadays. You get a phishing email and you click on a link that you shouldn't have, and all of a sudden you get red flashing lights on your computer, and they go, haha, we got you. If you want your computer information or your data back, you've got to pay us $5,000 in Bitcoin, or one of the other rapidly plunging cryptocurrencies that's out there right now. There's hundreds of them. But that's what they do, and the only way to get rid of it is to pay the ransom. And even after you do that, you can have corrupted data, you can have lost data and all that. Well, our policy would actually pay the ransom to get your systems unlocked, and then Beasley will come alongside you and walk you through the process of restoring lost data, consulting you on fortifying your defenses moving forward. So even for small congregations, cyber liability is important because of the data, the privacy liability side of things. The example I use all the time and is, I'll use, let's say Mary. Mary is the church administrator, and Mary is leaving church on Sunday afternoon. She's got a coffee in one hand, her Bible in the other, and she's got the offering envelope under her other arm because she's going to go to the bank. And she sets her coffee and her envelope on top of the car, gets in, throws the Bible on the seat, grabs her coffee, gets in the car, goes to the bank. She gets to the bank and goes, oh crap, where are the offerings at? They're nowhere to be found. They're laying in a ditch somewhere. Well, you want to talk about a privacy breach? Pretty good chance you've got name, address, account number, and routing number on these little things called check blanks. Now you got a data exposure. That could be something that a claim is filed against. So even for our small churches, nothing else, just for that specific type of exposure, cyber liability is a good thing to have. And Church Mutual, by the way, if you're curious, we have got a plethora of information on our website. For those of you who might be watching the video, just go to churchmutual.com and there's a tab that says for customers. There's a bunch of good stuff under there. And there's a risk control tab, which has tons of, everything from videos on armed intruder prevention. We've got a partnership with an organization called the Alice Institute, which is the #1 active shooter training organization in the country, to coach you on emergency response planning, things of that nature. Sample sets of policies and procedures for child protection. So for maybe our smaller churches who say, yeah, we know we should probably be doing background checks, we know we should have some written procedures in place, but we have no idea where to start. We can resource you on that. We've got sample procedures that you can use and adopt as your own. We've got a partnership with a company called Trusted Employees that facilitates background checks for employees and volunteers, very, very inexpensive. And then we've also got a partnership with a company called Ministry Safe, and they can facilitate training of volunteers and employees, where let's say you're doing a vacation Bible school and you got 15 volunteers that you need to train on child protection. Then go to Ministry Safe's website, set up a username and a password, go through an hour-and-a-half long module, and Ministry Safe tracks all that stuff permanently for the church to basically check that box for you. Because when it comes to sexual misconduct or any liability exposure for that matter, you want to position your ministry in a place where you can't easily be accused of negligence, right? So doing background checks, educating your volunteers about proper interaction with kids, a lot of common sense stuff, like, hey, always 2 adults with kids. If you're in a room that has a door, have a big window on the door, like you guys do. If there's no window on the door, leave the door open. You know, you want to have as much transparency as you can. So if there was a sexual misconduct claim filed against the church, and they said, okay, tell us about the procedures you have in place for vetting volunteers, and you go, we don't have any. That's going to lead to a larger claim, a larger settlement. So
like the door issue, I heard Roger mention earlier something about counseling. So you're doing counseling, right? If you're doing counseling of a youth and this door doesn't have a window, you're doing it in here, you're in a one-on-one session. All it takes is an accusation. Doesn't matter if anything happened or not. All it takes is an accusation. Doing counseling sessions where you're in plain sight through the window, or again, leaving the door open. It's just a way to protect you as a counselor, which also protects the church.
Yeah, Chad makes a great point. It's not so much what happened, it's what did somebody say happened. And you know, I talk to the men about this because I is one. I say, you know, especially as men, when it comes to accusations of misconduct, we're guilty, and you're guilty until proven innocent nowadays. That's kind of the culture that we live in. And there's really no recourse for us in a court of law if someone makes a false accusation against us. And not just men, but ladies as well. And believe you me, there are a lot of false accusations that get levied. I talked to a pastor a couple years ago in a church in Minnesota that I quoted. He told me a terrible story of a situation where a young lady accused her stepdad within the church of inappropriateness, and they went through court, and his name got dragged through the mud, and 2 years later she came clean and said she made it all up because she was mad at him. And you know, that poor guy, there's nothing he can do to try and recover his reputation. So position yourself and always being aware of situations that could potentially lead to even a false accusation is key. And the simplest thing is just that transparency. If you have to be alone, you know, in a counseling situation with a minor, like Chad said, you know, even though it may make them a little more uncomfortable to have a door open, it's much better for you as a counselor to do that. And I'm sure that's stuff you're very aware of.
And the claims for sexual, I'll use the word assault, and that may be wrong, in your clients been going up or down, or what's the company been seeing?
You know, I haven't asked that question lately.
So when I started, again, this is going back 5 years ago, I can't remember the exact stat that she gave me, but we have a specific claims person within Church Mutual who receives all the inbound calls on sexual misconduct claims. And at that time, again, this was 5 years ago, I think that there was upwards of somewhere between 3 and 10 a day that we were getting calls on. And it's not just claims, it's also, well, we had this situation happen. So there were also some what ifs, but it's astounding within our clientele base, within the religious organizations, institutions, the amount of sexual misconduct claims that we receive on a daily basis. It's sickening, honestly. So that's why we can't emphasize enough having proper protocols in place, having the proper policies and procedures, and actually following what you have written down. So there's some churches that we have that have these great plans, they've got these great procedures. They get it, they put it into the filing cabinet, never look at it again, never follow it. So the important part is actually following the plans that you have in place. Having annual review sessions of what you are supposed to do. There's also the first reporter rules and laws that are out there. If you sense any type of abuse from somebody else in a child's family. So, yeah, it's disturbing the amount of claims that we get.
Yeah, I think when I started 10 years ago, it was, it's leveled off, I think, Roger, at least in my time. And I think a big part of that is because so much awareness has been raised on it, and so many good resources have been provided to organizations. And I personally noticed a big difference early on in my career when I would be visiting with a smaller church. Well, we know everybody, and so, and as Christians, we tend to implicitly trust people. It's kind of in our nature. But the more time has gone by, the more I noticed even our smaller congregations realize that, yeah, we know everybody, but we don't know everybody, because you never know what someone's real history is. And that doesn't mean that, right, it's in our nature as believers, we want to forgive and believe people can be restored, but at the same time, from a legal perspective, you have to understand that if there was someone that snuck through that did happen to have something on their background that would have precluded them from working with kids, that's going to be a problem in the event of a claim. So I don't have time to go into this deeply at this point in time, but I'll just say this onto the camera for any pastors or board members who may hear this. Please do not let an agent write your sexual misconduct coverage on what's called a claims made coverage basis. It can cause big issues down the road. Basically, what in the insurance industry, there's two covered ways to cover a claim. There's what's called an occurrence form and a claims made form. An occurrence form says the company that was insuring you at the time the incident happened is a company that pays the claim. So you take a hailstorm as an example. It's very easy to pinpoint the date the hailstorm happened. So if Church Mutual is insuring you the day that storm happens, we pay the claim. Claims made is a little bit different, and if I screw this up, Chad, feel free to jump in. What claims made does is it sets a retroactive date for your coverage. So let's say that Acme Insurance was going to insure your church beginning today, May 13th, is it? 15th, 14th. 14th. So the start of your policy is May 14th, and they have a claims made date on the sexual misconduct. They're going to cover you as long as you're insured with them. But the second you switch companies, if your next company doesn't adopt that retroactive date of May 13th, 2022, you're going to have a gap in your insurance. So here's the challenge. You're not going to find a company that's going to want to go back retroactively and adopt sexual misconduct exposure. So I see it with, I won't say names to protect the innocent, but I do see a lot of companies writing it that way because they know that when a church leaves them, then they're washing their hands of that exposure. So claims made sexual misconduct, bad. If you have it, get away from it as fast as you can.
So to use us as an example, when Corey's saying that other carriers don't want to go back, we will actually go back 5 years, as of right now. But again, when I started 5 years ago, we would go back however long. Within the last 2 years, that changed to now we will only go back 5 years. And I foresee a day where we either won't go back at all or go back only a year or so. Again, to use a specific example, I have a church that I was quoting that they were with a carrier that had a retroactive date going back to 1990. So if you think about that, so I graduated high school in '94 in Lower Michigan, and the Catholic Church in town had a pastor there who was sexually assaulting kids at that time came out in the news 3 years ago. So if you think about that, this church that I was working on has a retroactive date back to 1990. If I were to write it, I could only go back 5 years, so they would have coverage from 2017 going forward. But from 1990 to 2017, they would have no coverage for anything that happened. And I use that Catholic church as an example because that claim came up 2-3 years ago. The act took place in the 90s. So when Corey's saying be careful with this coverage, it's extremely important to be careful with it because there's a lot of stuff on the line that could come down because you don't know what happened. I mean, were you in this church going back to 1990?
And the reason that insurance companies have gotten so gun shy about that is because of something called reviver statutes. So each state is different, but there's statutes of limitations that states have on reporting these types of things. In Minnesota, I think it's 6 years or 6 years past one's 18th birthday, if they're a minor, something like that. Whatever the state is, it is. But what Minnesota did a few years ago, which forced I think it was the Diocese of St. Paul into bankruptcy, was they lifted the reviver statute, or they lifted that statute of limitations and said, okay, because we've been made aware that there was such issues, we're basically suspending that statute of limitations and saying that anyone who's ever been abused, even if it was 40 years ago, can bring a claim forward. And there's no rule that says they can't enact that reviver statute again. I don't know if that ever happened in North Dakota or not, but that's why insurance companies are getting really gun shy about the claims made, sexual misconduct, and being retroactively covering people. So, yeah.
I don't want to go down this real far, but are you finding more claims against church paid staff or against volunteer staff, specifically for sexual assault?
I don't know. I would guess it's a pretty even balance.
That's what I was gonna say, it's probably pretty close to 50-50.
Yeah.
You had a question?
Yeah, I work a lot with tech ministry in our church, and just kind of wondering, like, any liabilities that you might have with, like, taking photos, especially of children, or anyone really, live streaming kids or people's images, like,
So do you
what
have,
do we need to do there?
do you have a multimedia release form that you have people sign off on?
No.
So again, Corey had mentioned going onto our website, churchmutual.com, finding that risk control tab, and there's all sorts of multimedia liability release waivers that it would be recommended that you actually have something in writing. So if you have a youth function going on, all parents need to sign a liability waiver that allows you to post or to live stream, so that it's just another step in.
How long is that good for? Is that like just for that year and then they need to redo it, or just for that event?
I don't know what our form says, but you could kind of design the form to be for a period of time,
Okay.
or maybe for a specific event. The tab you're looking for is, there'll be it's either under for customers or under the risk control tab, Chloe, and it will say sample legal forms and documents. That's where you're gonna find that release form.
And can we build it into our online stuff, like, cause our parents come in and sign into Planning Center, can we add that in? Like, it doesn't have to be a paper form, right? It can be an electronic.
Yeah, does Planning Center have that capability now where you can integrate documents? Are you specifically wondering about integrating with Planning Center, or just maybe
Well,
putting something on the church
Yeah,
website?
we were
or-
just talking about this the other day, cause that would be a question I'd have to ask Planning Center.
Okay.
Cause I'm not sure, but somehow putting it on there, cause we have different forms on our website. So whether it's Planning Center or whether having the parents, hey, click on this, fill this out, like
Yeah.
those forms that they can.
Yeah, that's a good question that I'm not qualified to answer, but I'm a good old-fashioned paper guy still, but I would imagine there's gotta be a way you could do that, you know, do like a fillable PDF or something.
Well, I know the YMCA does it,
Okay, yeah,
so it's for video and photos, so.
okay,
Yeah, I'm trying to find,
Well, while you're looking that up, a question, I'm a foster parent.
okay.
I can't give permission for my foster child to be on anything. So I don't sign anything like that.
Mhm.
The church is videoing stuff, they get on the camera. What liability do we have as a church?
Well, there's potential exposure there if the, you know, the real parent of that child and biological parent came forward and wanted to make a claim against the church, they could. We would defend the church. So, you know, anybody can sue anybody for anything nowadays. Even if it's a total nuisance lawsuit that goes nowhere in court, there's still gonna be legal fees incurred, but Church Mutual is gonna go to bat for you know, if anyone brings any kind of a suit against the church.
Isn't there a difference between like a public event? I mean, even like if you come into the church, it's a public event, you know, cause there's lots of events you go to where camera crews are there and, you know, these, whatever venue, outside, inside, whatever. They don't go around, you know, asking for everybody's signature on
Right,
stuff, you
right,
know, and you could
yeah.
be on TV, you could be in a newspaper, you could be here or there,
Yeah.
you know.
And you know, I'm not an attorney, but I've talked to attorneys, and there's some disagreement, you know, but what do liability waivers really do? You know, can someone really waive their right to, not really, they serve as primarily a deterrent to potential lawsuits is what they do. I mean, you can't waive your rights by signing a piece of paper. So, yeah, I guess that's just really a matter of choice if they don't wanna put that into practice. But yeah, cause yeah, you're right, you know, some will, some won't.
Well, I guess my question is there a difference between like coming into a service where there's a bunch of people and you might just be, you know, on Facebook or a
Yeah.
picture in the crowd as opposed to a teacher taking a picture of a few kids at a table and then posting it, or?
That's a good question, and that would actually be a good question for our risk control department. So one of the other things you'll see on our website is there's, under that risk control tab, there's one that says Ask Risk Control Central. And you can email them with any questions you've got, and they're gonna get back to you within 24 hours with some sound recommendations. Or they'll let you know, and they'll resource you, they'll send you materials too. So that would be something that if I got that email from you as a regional rep, I would forward that to my risk consulting guys and say, hey, can you respond to this please? And then they'll copy me back in. So I rely on them pretty heavily for a lot of that stuff, and I think it'd be a good question to ask. And whether or not you're a customer of ours, they'll answer your question.
I do highly recommend the Ministry Safe, we do that.
You do, okay.
And the main pastors go through the 15 hours, and then any main leaders, and then we have our volunteers go through the hour sessions, and we've done it as a group, and I like that actually a lot better, because if you send the 1 hour trainings, they can do it at home or whatever, but what we found is we've actually had a lot of deliverance sessions through it because of past hurts and things that people have gone through, or they've known somebody, you know, something. So you get to know your people, your volunteers a lot more, and also it helps to open up conversations, you know, about those types of things.
Yeah, you know, I never thought about that component of it. That's interesting you mentioned that.
Yeah, it's been really, really good, and we even have because we have some of our team leadership who work with the kids and as well, and so we have them go through it too,
Awesome.
which has been really good.
There is, yeah.
with us, yeah.
You get a 50% discount, I think, on their annual membership fee, and then there's a discount, I think, per training.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So we have like a business within, similar to Joy House, so it's an exterior business, I guess that's renting the space within our church. And on more than one occasion have like harassment issues happening there and stuff like that. How does that work? Like, is that then covered because it's inside?
So it's a
the
total
building?
separate entity of,
Renting the
Renting from the
space.
church?
Right.
so do you get certificates of insurance from them?
I'm not sure about any of that, I guess.
You should be requiring that they have their own liability policy,
Mm.
and specifically naming your church as additional insured on their policy. Then that way, if anything comes up, it would go to their policy primarily. But if anything does happen on the grounds, again, in the litigious society that we're in, the church is also going to get named, as well as the entity that is renting from you. So that's why you want to make sure that you get proof of insurance from them.
And having a good facilities use agreement in place is not a bad idea. We've also got a sample of that on our website.
Yep.
Basically just kind of spells out the terms of them leasing from you, it's not a lease agreement, but it's more simplistic than that, but that's just a good practice to be in, Just kind of adds another level of accountability, if you will, to that situation, so. Good questions.
Yeah, these are like very specific to our.
That's okay.
It's like us later, but we have one issue with our kids area being unsecured because of a fire door that can't be locked. Any tips on what we can do to provide better security? It has to be open, so that people can push it out to get to the exterior exit in the event of an emergency, of course, so, but it leaves the kids able to be accessed.
Oh,
Can I tell you what we've done, is we have a door like that where people could leave the building, and it has a 15-second timer on it.
Okay.
So they hit the bar, the alarm goes off, and in 15 seconds they can open it up.
Okay.
I think that's what we're putting to get out the north lobby.
Yeah,
So it
that's
sends
good.
off an alarm if anyone were to go through it.
Yeah, it sets off an alarm, yes. But then in 15 seconds it opens, and that met the criteria for the fire department here, so.
Yeah, some of that is working with your local fire departments and based on what their codes are. But yeah, you want to try to make sure that you have the kids in an area that is least accessible from the outside.
Is this ministry safe training good for security individuals, or is this more?
What do you mean security?
Like people who are providing church security, or is this more?
That's gonna be the under the armed security or armed intruder prevention. You're gonna find a lot of resources there from ALICE, and ALICE stands for Alert, Lockdown, Inform, Counter, and Evade. That's an acronym for how to respond to. Although they're not teaching people to lock down anymore, they're not teaching people to get out of the building, I think, as fast as they can, which always made sense to me. So, but
So are you saying people who do safety, or finding out more about?
Who do the safety, like
Yeah,
it's the big brute guy. who
yeah,
launches
we
them.
have anybody, working with minors 18 and under. So it could be your bus driver for an event, it could be your safety team, anybody who is able to go behind the doors and be with the kids.
So you would certainly need one that's interacting with kids. You'd want to have them go through that training. But if you're looking for specific resources for them to put together an emergency response plan, let's say, or to learn more about mitigating the risk of intruders, the ALICE information is going to be really good. And even that, a lot of that can be really simple. If you're in a church where you don't have cameras, you don't have a sophisticated exit and entry system that's automatic or has key cards, With my small church in Minnesota, what I did, I said, hey guys, here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna assign 2 guys on a weekly basis, and you're just gonna be eyes and ears. Just gonna keep an eye on the perimeter, keep an eye on the parking lot. Because believe it or not, if you would just have eyes on the parking lot, a lot of these instances could have maybe not been prevented, but evacuation could have been taken, authorities could have been notified sooner. By the way, on our website, there's also some great technology resources that are available. Some of them are only available for smaller churches because they were designed for that, but things like our water and temperature sensor kits for a church as large as Evangel, I don't think they're doing it for large buildings anymore because it's just not capable of monitoring the whole building. But if you take a smaller church, say under 15,000 square feet, you can get a free sensor kit that monitors the building for water and temperature, and it reduces the cost of frozen pipe claims, sewer backup claims. We've got a new smoke alarm system that basically, it's a little different than what I thought we were gonna roll out, but it basically detects the sound of a smoke alarm in a building and then notifies someone in the church to say, hey, something's not right at the building, so you can either call the fire department or go down there and check it out. But we've also got an armed intruder alert system. And what it does is it interacts on, works on a wireless network as well, but this is connected directly to the local police department. And you get this little stick about that long with a blue ripcord on it. And you might put that in the administrator's office, or maybe even behind the pulpit, for the pastor. And if there's ever an emergency situation on an intruder, you pull that ripcord and it notifies the local authorities immediately. Which makes sense, because in a situation like that, the first thing you're thinking about is probably not get out my phone and dial 911. It's get safe and secure, right? Well, seconds matter in situations like that. So, yeah, we've got, so there's a lot of stuff we've got on our website. I've got to go in there from time to time and go, oh, I didn't know we had that, So, yeah, a lot of good stuff. No, good questions.
Do you have something specific about bounce houses and community events on church property?
Specific, I don't think so, but
There's probably some stuff under youth playground equipment. When it comes to like bouncy houses, if you own them, we're gonna ask a lot more questions. If you're renting them, a lot of the liability goes back to the facility that you're renting them from. So the questions are a lot different as to if you own it versus if you're renting it. But you always want to make sure that you have 2 adults outside of a bouncy house. Monitoring, making sure that X number of kids are in there at one time and that it doesn't go over that number. Monitoring how safely they're acting inside of there. That you don't get the one kid who's
Wahoo McDaniel,
bouncing all over the place and knocking everybody
Jimmy
down.
Superfly Snuka, free wrestling fans.
So I think we're getting close to the end of our time here. Is there any other really important questions that you want to have? We've got 5 minutes left. Just want to make sure that we address any.
Do you have a recommendation for firewalls and that sort of thing?
There is a technology section on there too. I didn't look at it yesterday.
Website.
Yep, I didn't look at it yesterday.
That would be
but,
under the cyber liability.
But again, utilize that risk control email. You can call them or you can email them. They're super good. They do a really good job of resourcing it. But yeah, I didn't look at that in depth, but I do know there's a section for IT stuff, which is probably where you'd find that sign-off form too for photos and whatnot.
Is your church insured with us?
So, what's the name of yours in Williston?
Life Church?
Life Church, okay. Life Church. Are you by the school out there?
By Williston Trinity Christian?
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
The
The one right across the street?
Not that
No,
one.
okay.
But yeah, it's up, we're very close to
Okay,
it, so,
gotcha.
Yeah.
It's been years since I've been out there, but that's the one I was picturing, because there's a daycare in that church that I wrote across the street from the schools, so anyhow. Cool. The Beulah Church, I think, was the Evangelical Free Church is what I was thinking of.
Okay,
think
yeah,
it's-
we're right off 49.
Okay,
It's not a very pretty building.
gotcha. Gets the job done, all
God
right.
is there. The Holy Spirit is there.
Yeah, I've been into a lot of nice churches that are completely void of all the right things, if you know what I mean. So,
Almost like should be on one of those scary shows, like Ghost Hunters or something.
so,
Well, thank you very much for your time, and thank you for the good questions.
hopefully we didn't bore you to death, it's always a risk you're on talking insurance, but good questions though.
Feel free to reach out to us if you have any other questions.
All right,
Thank
thanks
you.
guys.
Yep, thank you.